As many of y'all who are well studied already know, the civilizations of the classical Hapi River Valley represent the apex of traditional African culture. They also house the majority of the socio-political and material-cultural prototypes of contemporary Africa. The Hapi River Valley cradle, from a cultural substratum perspective, is important because the majority of the evolutionary roots of modern African societies can absolutely not be found in the Green Sahara, as is brilliantly articulated in the analysis of Dr. Musa Lam. These evolutionary roots can also not be found in the unconfirmed area of linguistic diffusion called Negro Congo or Niger Congo that has been thoroughly dismantled by scholars such as Kenneth Olson. Despite the attempts by unlearned naysayers against the idea of intracontinental commerce and socio-political affiliation in pre-colonial Africa, the available genetic, archaeological, and historical evidence firmly establishes a deep interconnected Africa with countless intracontinental diasporas, such as the Makushi diaspora that spread from ancient Kush in the 16th century BCE to the Jaliba River Valley in West Africa, the Kongo River Valley in Central Africa, as well as the Limpopo and Zambezi River Valleys in Southeast Africa, the Puda Ponda diaspora that spread from the 3rd century BCE Punt to Central and Southern Africa, the Lamande diaspora that spread from the 5th century BCE Meroe to the entirety of the Saharo-Sahelian zone, the Kasara diaspora, which represents 3rd century Kushites migrating from their former West Asian vassals of ancient Kimi into Western, Central, and Southern Africa, and the Shangala diaspora, which represent post-pharaohnic refugees from ancient Kimi in the Jaliba and Senegal River valleys of West Africa, the Bada Biafra in what is now Nigeria and Cameroon, the Kongo River Valley of Central Africa, and the Great Lakes region of Southeast Africa. Nagash and Shackley's archeometric and geochemical analyses of obsidian toolkits in the Diri Dawa, Ethiopia, confirms evolutionary evidence for long-distance trade among Homo sapiens as far back as the Middle Stone Age 60,000 years ago. The analysis of Shadrach Chirukuri of Oxford shows that Hapi River Valley populations engaged in extensive metallurgical trade with ancient cultures in West Africa, beginning at least 10,000 years ago and intensifying in subsequent millennia. According to Dr. Kevin MacDonald, the Capsian culture and Khartoumian culture, typified by the Leiderband horizon complex, played a primary role in the peopling of Western Africa from the Central and Eastern Saharo-Sahelian zone. The Gajigana ceramic industry that can be found from Sudan to modern Nigeria validates this migrational vector. When it comes to the specific evidence of commercial contact between ancient Kimi and the rest of Africa, we may look to the following examples. There's the 23rd century BCE expedition of Harkuf to the land of Yam in the Anedi mountain region of Chad during the 6th dynasty. The 21st century BCE Mentuhotep inscription that's also found near the northeastern Chadian border. The 15th century BCE Hatshepsut expedition to Punt or Pwanit during the 18th dynasty, which according to the archeaogenetic strontium isotope analysis of bones from Papio Hamadras, New Kingdom amulets depicting Papio cynocephalus and Papio Anubis remains from the pre-dynastic era to the New Kingdom, helped locate Punt in a region that goes from Eritrea to the Swahili coast. The 9th century BCE trade of Mari de Kissi copper from what is now Burkina Faso into the Hapi River Valley during the 22nd dynasty, and the 7th to 6th century BCE maritime circumnavigation of the continent commissioned by Nasut Nikau during the 26th dynasty that is corroborated by the presence of Kemetic Macacus sylvanus and Tejehanet or faience beads found in the British Isles. And this is in a report by Dr. Karim P. Kaur in the Saharan Journal. Faunal analysis also helps unveil the connection between ancient Kimi and Inner Africa from the pre-dynastic to post-dynastic period. The following species from the pharaohnic civilization in Crocodylus or the West African crocodile, Threschionus aethiopicus, as well as Hippopotamus niloticus, can all be found throughout infra-Saharan Africa and confirm the deep African roots of the classical Hapi River Valley. In the post-dynastic context, the following pastoral domesticates firmly validate migration waves from the pharaonic civilization to West Africa. Some of these are Equus africanus, found first in pre-dynastic Kimi around the 4th millennia BCE and then later in Siori, Senegal around the 1st year to 250 CE. Equus virgus caballus, found first in ancient Kimi from the 18th to 16th century BCE and then Akumbi Mali from the year 600 to 1000 CE. Sus scorfa, found in pre-dynastic Kimi around the 4th millennia BCE and then West Africa during the 2nd millennium. Camelus thomasi dromedarius, found in Kasser Ibrim during the first millennium and then later in Siore, Senegal from 250 to 400 CE. Ovis amon aries and Capra aegagris hircus, found in the 6th millennium BCE and then in Western Africa from 2200 to 850 BCE, and Bos primigenius taurus, found in predynastic Kemi in the 9th millennium BCE and then West Africa from 2200 to 850 BCE. So again, the fact that you have pastoral domesticates found first in ancient Kemi and then in West Africa validates a migration of the populations that managed them from east to west. Paleopathological studies in human parasites called schistosomes also validate this mass human migration, and it started from the Great Lakes region to ancient Kemi and then went subsequently to West and Central Africa. When it comes to the migration, specifically, there is a commonality of naming conventions for the waterways and communication zones across the Sahel. There are also commonalities with respect to hydrotheology and the functions of Bida for the Soninke, Kamaba for the Fulani, and Hapi for the Remenkimi. The following historical linguistic correspondences can assist in tracing the movement of toponyms on the African continent. This methodology was also used to trace the movement of Persian populations in ancient Kemi during the late period. Shamarkakada's osteological and craniometric analysis of the post-26 dynasty inhabitants of Kemi that show series that deviate from the indigenous Northeast African norm validate this foreign incursion. Diop applied this same linguistic methodology in discovering the origin of contemporary Western Central African populations in a classical Hapi River Valley continuum. This particular expansion represents the Changala diaspora and was initiated by the aforementioned Persian invasion. Numerous contemporary African populations have oral testimonies that confirm the invasion of ancient Kemi and Kush, as well as their subsequent sojourn towards the interior of Africa. When corroborating orature with other sources of history, Afrikaner researchers abide by the following parameters. Dr. Taharka Ade, in his synopsis of conventional Africological historiography, affirms that an accurate analysis of African societies place written records in literature and oral testimonies as complementary pieces of documentary evidence. Dr. Julde Laya lists the following elements of oral typology that are used by scholars to detect the accuracy and dynamics of various testimonies. They are its form, background, historical content, depth of knowledge, extension area, as well as the origin and chronology of the facts related. The Malangi model developed by Dr. Dika Aqua is historical spatiotemporal and involves three intersecting axes of analysis that can be used to validate oral narratives with respect to chronological, spatial, historical, and sociocultural corroboration. It is clear that Afrikaner scholars are extremely rigorous when it comes to the analysis and application of oral testimonies. With this data, we can accurately reconstruct African history and quantify the degree of interrelatedness between different African populations. After the fall of Meroe, the Kara of the dynastic period set up the Wangara inter-empire and established a seat at Kanem. In it sat Dajara along the Hapi River Valley, Zagara centered around the Lake Chad Basin, and Gala along the Oya and Senegal River valleys in Western Africa. From Wangara, we see the precipitation of states in Central Africa, such as Galasimo and Galanjam in the Kongo Basin. So when it comes to the specific orature of African populations that validate these histories of descending from the Hapi River Valley and setting up contemporary states in Western and Central Africa, we have the following. The people of Kanem, also called Zagawa and Beriberi, were referred to as Garamante in classical literature. They engendered the Wangara inter-empire, or double kingdom, from the 7th to the 11th century, and they produced the Ule and Malay lineages. Dugu, the first founder, is a descendant of Akmalem, which is a pharaohnic individual and a member of the aforementioned Kara people. Idris Aluma, one of the rulers of Kanem, is also a descendant of this lineage, and the diplomatic success of the Kanem Empire can be compared to the 18th dynasty. Ancient DNA analysis of Central African populations supports the Gurgem Chronicle narrative of a pharaonic origin of the Kanem lineage. Here we can see that the Kanem Empire represented a genomic intersection where Africans from across the continent existed and intermingled. It is from this point in the Lake Chad Basin that most West African populations existed after migrating from the Hapi River Valley. So when it comes to the Fulani, They are the descendants of the Shangala migration, and they're related to the Sinagala descendants of Minamale. And they followed a waterway migration from the Hapi River Valley to the Jaliba River Valley in Western Africa. And when it comes to their structural biology, Fulani craniometrics match populations in the upper Nile River. And Fulani hair types and hairstyles in the trichology also match populations in the Nile. And there are numerous Fulani toponyms found in Eastern and Central Africa, which kind of validate their migratory origins back and forth between the Hapi River Valley and Western Africa. And Amadou Hampade Ba, in his work Njedo Dewal, quantifies the Fulani ancestral nations of Heli and Yoyo as ancient Kimi. Genetically, Fulani are autosomally linked to the Ari Omadic speakers of Eastern Africa. And for those who are familiar with the work of Dr. Musa Lam, he documents the extensive amount of commonalities between the Fulani civilizations and the civilizations on the classical Hapi River Valley and ancient Kimi and Kush, which basically validate the orature that they have of coming from these societies. So when it comes to the Igala of Nigeria in the Middle Belt region, Gala and Igala are interchangeable terms in the Igala language. The original name for the Igala clans prior to Abutu Eje was Igala Mela. Igala Mela describes the paternal lineage of the infamous Onojo Agboni. The Wukari people of that region called them Ahel Gara. The Ada of Igala, along with a collection of linguists, historians, and anthropologists, confirmed the Hapi River Valley origins of the Igala at the 2020 Igala National Conference. The first Igala entered the Wukari area in 700 BCE. The Igala Mela and Igalogba migrated to Ida around 500 BCE. The Igala Attalus contains 82 rulers and goes back to 900 CE, starting with Amene. When it comes to some of their neighbors, the Barome, autosomal analysis of the Barome of the Middle Belt region cluster close to Eastern African populations along the Hapi River Valley. And most scholars use this genomic evidence to validate a Sahelian migration between the Hapi River Valley and Western Africa that went from 3000 to 1000 BP. In terms of Igbo oral narratives, Ike Ejiomanta and Okpani Okoronkwo list ancient Kimi as their origin, which corroborates with the Igala narratives. The Igbo and the Igala generally agree about the history of their interaction. The Igala established dominion over the Igbo settlements, especially during the reign of Onojo Ogboni. The Igbo people of Osumari claim an Igala origin. Igala traditions state that Akpai, Omolu, Onyandoni, and Abo are all of Igala descent. The Umueri clans of Aguleri, Nteje, Amanuke, and Igbariam state that Eri was an Igala man, and Eri is the father of the Igbo. And the Umueri clans of Nri and Oreri list the Igala as descendants of Eri's second wife and therefore close relatives to the Igbo. The Ezi Nri Oraeri is commonly depicted with the Igala Ejubi Jualo pectoral mask. And this is another evidence of the relationship between these two populations, especially in the area, the border areas of Onitsha and so forth. So the presence of EM2 subclades from pre-dynastic Kimi among the Igbo and the Yoruba validate this migratory link. So moving on to the Yoruba lineage starts with Muenya, and Muenya was the grandson of the Wangara general Modi Soap. Oranmiyan would be the grandson of Muenya, and he would be the founder of the Oyo and Edo lineages. When it comes to orature, the Awujale of Ujebuland cites Sudan, or ancient Kush, as the origin point of their lineage. Dr. Salau applies this orature evidence to a pluridisciplinary approach that combines historical linguistics, archaeology, and cultural anthropology in uncovering a Lutanzigi migratory origin of the Yoruba people that journeyed along the tributaries of the Nile into West Africa. And according to Dr. Joel Irish's dental morphological analysis, both the Yoruba and the Igbo have a dental morphology that brings them closer to Eastern African populations as opposed to most Western Africans. So all of this would make the Yoruba part of the Sinagala migration and closely related to the Igala, Igbo, Nupe, and Beriberi or Zagawa people. Theological and philosophical correspondences between the Yoruba and the Hapi River Valley populations further validate this migratory link. You have Nun and Nunet with Nini and Aini, Kek and Keket with Okunkun and Ketekete. And again, Dr. Salau, compiled these different correspondences just to relate the development of the Yoruba civilization as an extension of the pharaohnic civilization within the post-dynastic period. So the Songhai lineage was started by Gia Alayaman and Makabate, who founded the cities of Gao and Kukia in the 7th century. Sani Ali Ber and Askia Muhammad are the descendants of this lineage, and there are numerous theological correspondences between the Songhai traditions and the traditions of ancient Kemet. And there's also many correspondences between the building systems and the structural tectonics between the Songhai and the classical civilizations of ancient Kemet and Kush. Some of these correspondences are Atur, which is a Remen Kimi snake altar, and Turu, a spirit which has an altar among the Songhai. Turu is the ruling spirit of Songhai cosmogony. Then you have Hapi, which is the Remen Kimi Nter of the Nile River, and then Hampi, a ritual vase of the ruling Turu spirits of the Songhai. Which means great man or Nasut, and Urfama, the name of an Nter among the Songhai that's also called Dandu Urfama. Then you have Suten, the king of the south, and Suntan, ancestor of the Turu spirits of the Songhai. There's also Para, which means great house, the origin of the term pharaoh, and then Fara and Fari among the Songhai. And there are numerous, archaeologists and architects who have compiled these relationships, and they use it to unify architecture on the African continent. Some of these architectural correspondences compiled by Namdi Ella are the usage of adobe bricks, vaulted roofs with ventilation, framed opening moldings, projecting sills, the usage of external stairs, the enclosed courtyard or the impluvium, bioenvironmental mimicry, and the usage of fractal proxemics. The comparative analysis of Dr. Thomas Schneider and Gaia Mega on the Lake Chad Basin and its many tributaries, particularly those in the area of Niger, validate a migration vector from the pharaohnic civilization to contemporary West Africa. Their analysis particularly focused on the cultivation of Latus niloticus, which the ancient Remen Kimi named their city of Letopolis, or Tassanet, after, the domestication of the Kuri cattle, which descended from the taurine breeds of ancient Kimi, the usage of the Biram 5-stringed harp, which is seen among contemporary Lake Chad Basin populations, as well as throughout classical Africa, and the usage of papyrus reed boats, which can be seen in both populations and validate a method of travel from the Hapi River Valley to the Lake Chad Basin in Western Africa. All of these pieces of evidence corroborate with the Songhai narratives and testimonies about their sojourn from the Hapi River Valley into West Africa. So there is a long list of research that, links these two populations. When it comes to genetics, EM2 and A1B1 subclades from the classical Hapi River Valley are seen among contemporary Songhai populations, and they deeply corroborate with their oral testimonies. The Mandé lineages are rooted in Mina Male, the brother of Ugbatu Male, who is the father of the Fulani people, and Ule, one of his cousins. The Bamako Colloquium cites the Hapi River Valley and Kimi as the origin of the Mandé judicial system. According to scholar Yusu Tata Sise, the Mandé ancestral nation of Korutumuba is ancient Kimi and Kush. Wa Kamisoko established that the Mandé legal system, as stated above, comes from the pharaonic system. The Herero tradition states that African from Aswan, which the Soninke call Sana, followed a waterway migration route from the Hapi River Valley to the Jalibe River Valley. Lawalo Keita, the son of Bilali Bunama, is the beginning of the Malinke lineage. The Mali Empire at Niani, Bambara, Ashanti, and Techiman, etc. descend from this lineage. And Marjati, aka Sundiata Keita, and Mansa Musa are also descendants of this lineage. Dingasise, the son of Kirijon Dunka and the grandson of Yugu Dungusi, starts the Soninke lineage, and these are Wangara and relatives of the Diodun populations. Tenkemenin is a descendant of this lineage, and actually the Egyptologist and the Soninke scholar Adama Drame actually drew correspondences between Tutankhamun and Tenkemenin of the Soninke. Akan is genetically related to Egypto-African languages, and the Akan, for those of you who are familiar with their history, are related to the Soninke population. They're considered post-Ouagadougou populations, or the Ouagadougou Soninke diaspora that descended south and established different kingdoms in the forest zone of Western Africa. According to scholars such as Obadeli Cambone, there is phonetic regularity between Akan, Yoruba, and Met Remen Kimi, the language of classical Africa. The Akan, Mandé, and Remen Kimi culture have many correspondences that are corroborated by divine kingship, totems, and royal regalia. HV1 analysis of mtDNA markers links the Mandé populations with classical Remen-Kimi populations. And the Akan are also autosomally related to the Oromo people, more so than other West Africans. The Malinke and the Soninke also have Kemetic EM2 and EM35 subclades that are found in Western Africa that also validate this migratory origin from the east to the west. The Mossi are descendants of the westerly Zagara migration from the Lake Chad region. They are related to the Diadun populations, and they are descendants of the Mamprusi princess Yenenga. She is the daughter of the Dagomba sovereigns Ndega and Napoko. Dagara, which is a neighboring language in Burkina Faso, is related to Met-Remen-Kimi and other Paleo-African languages. And Moronaba, in its title, is very similar to the Neb, or the Lord, in ancient Kimi. And there are numerous commonalities in their divine kingship structure, the constitutional protocols of the society, and the electoral council of elders. And this has been compiled by numerous scholars such as Sheikh Diop, Theophile Obenga, and others, who have just found so many different similarities between the Mossi society and the societies of classical Africa in Kimi and Kush. When it comes to the Wolof, they are also rooted in the Senegala migration wave. Galambu, the first Jolof, was a descendant of Warjabi and Ngola. They are related to Kayor and Tekror. And Giajanjaye was a descendant of Sal and potentially a Ngara man. And this speaks to the Fulani, Serer, and furthermore Beriberi ancestry that has been compiled by numerous African scholars among the Wolof. When it comes to the orature, the Yoro-Diao migration from the Hapi River Valley to the Senegal River Valley is used to validate the Wolof migratory origins, as well as the origins of the Serer and the Fulani people. You have the Diago-Diao migration wave, the Mana migration wave, the Tondion migration wave, the Tormis migration wave, the Koli-Tunguela migration wave, and the Lam-Toro migration wave. Wolof is genetically related to Met-Remen-Kimi and other Egypto-African languages on the behalf of its phonology and its morphology. And scholars such as Nasir Sar, as well as Dr. Salim Faraji, have found numerous tumuli and megalithic structures in Senegal related to those found in ancient Kush. EM2 subclades from ancient Kimi can also be found among contemporary Wolof, which again, from a phylogenetic perspective, validates a migratory origin and an ancestral relationship between modern Wolof people and the Pharaohnic civilization. When it comes to the Grassfields people, these are again part of the Senegala lineage, and they descend from Nchare, particularly the Bamum, who is a descendant of Ale and the Ngara prince Aseji, whose grandfather is known as the first Majara. Nchare was a Tikar, and the first Tikar, Wuten, was a descendant of Mbum. Balaka Nyasana of Mbum was a descendant of Ngara, and his ancestors were known as Tumageri of the Beriberi people from the Lake Chad region. There's also some oral narratives that relate the ancestors of Balaka Nyasana to Meroe and even ancient Kush. And if you understand the historical relationship between the Zagawa and the Beriberi and ancient Kush, this makes sense. Njoya had many different literary documents that corroborate with these oral testimonies, particularly Sangam, which is the history and customs of the Bamu people. There are numerous correspondences identified by Theophile Obenga and other African scholars between the Akauku Bamu writing system and Mdudur of classical Africa. And there are also some signs that bear some similarities to the different Sepa or gnomes of classical Africa found in Mbum horns. As stated before, there are numerous commonalities in the architectural tectonics, and Shupamem as well as Madumba are genetically related to ancient Met-Remen-Kimi or Egyptian. Ancient DNA analysis, as well as EM2 subclades, validate the Baladi ancestry of the Bamileke, Bamum, and other grassfields populations. When it comes to the Sawa, they are other Senegala populations, and their lineage starts with Kongo, a relative of Muenya and the aforementioned Ale. They are the descendants of the Bambedi lineage of the Ngala Douala. Mbedi is a prominent descendant of Congo in this lineage, and the great scholar Dika Aqua descends from Mbedi's son, Malobi. They are closely related to most West Cameroonian groups, especially on the autosomal level, being that they are Sudanic populations and not necessarily directly related to so-called Bantus. Congo, the brother of Ale, who engendered the Mandara and Wandala lineages, is again one of their major ancestors. The Sawa or Douala language is genetically related to Metrimi via the research of the great linguist Gilbert Ngom. There are numerous theological commonalities from harmonious monism and Nyambeism, which is related to the Amen divination system. When it comes to the Effang, the first ancestor is Zanghamada, and he is considered the father of all humans. They place their origin in the Great Lakes region and then Bar El Ghazal, aka the land of Yam. Afrikara is one of his descendants, and this is a possible etymological origin of the term Africa. Nkoafri is the ancestor of all Awondo, Fangafri is the ancestor of all Effang, Okakafri is the ancestor of all Okak, Buluafri is the ancestor of all Bulu, and Ntumuafri is the ancestor of all Ntumu. And these would be the Senegala migrants that settled in Cameroon, Gabon, and Equatorial Guinea. And for those of you who are familiar, this would be the so-called Beti, Effang, and Yaoundé populations of contemporary Cameroon. And they descend from Congo on the Ngala Douala Kings list. And Iwanji is the grandson of Congo via Matadi. And again, these would be the ancestor of the Beti Pahawin populations of Cameroon. Autosomal analysis shows that the Effang are closely related to other Sudanic populations and very, very distant from so-called Bantu populations such as the Mbiaka, as stated before. When it comes to the Mandara, they are the descendants of Ale and the Senegala lineage. Ajara and his descendants started the Mandara lineage. They are related to the Wandala people via Sanda, the sibling of Ajara, and Hamadou Umar is a direct descendant of this lineage. And the Mandara are responsible for complex infrastructural responses to the Ma'afa and the enslavement of African people. The Adulis inscription in Eastern Africa speaks of a movement of a population called the Magara from the East African coast to Central Africa in the vicinity of the Lake Chad Basin. AM13 phylogeny as well as ancient DNA analysis supports these findings and basically affirms that the Mandara and their ancestors, as other neighboring African populations, migrated from the Hapi River Valley in Eastern Africa into Central and Western Africa. Extensive trade existed between Kimi and Kush and the land of Yam, which included populations now in northeast Congo. A statuette of Asar dated to the 7th century BCE was found on the banks of the Lualaba River near the confluence of Kalmengongo. A statue inscribed with the cartouche of Thutmose III was found south of the Zambezi River. The Kuba, Luba, and Lunda populations descend from Congo in the Senegala lineage. Some other descendants also include Nima Nzima of Congo, Nsaku Lau of Mbata, Shambul of Kuba, Kalala Ilunga of the Lunda, and Shibinda Ilunga of the Luba. EM2 subclades from the classical Hapi River Valley among the Galanjan peoples of Central Africa validate these narratives. Now, when it comes to Southern Africa, these populations are the descendants of Mbedi as well as the Bakushi people who migrated south and produced the Zulu, Shona, and the Ndebele populations. They are part of the Sagara migrations. Nguni and Luzumana are the descendants of these lineages. Zulu Kamalandela is also a relative of Mbedi. Malunda, son of Mbedi and Princess Mbuya of the Razwi in Zimbabwe, produced the Lozi populations. The EM2 subclades from pre-dynastic Kimi seen in modern Nguni populations supports this migration history. The Somali are descendants of Sa Male, and they are part of the Sagara migration as well as the Himyasum migration. According to the analysis and research of Antonor Furman, along with contemporary Africological linguists and historians, Somali is genetically related to Metrem and Kimi, or ancient Egyptian. And there are also many cultural commonalities between the two civilizations, as seen in some of the material cultures, from the Barkan headrest, the Hangul scepter, and the Jedo Shabuk whip. When it comes to the Swahili population, these are also rooted in the Sagara migration that penetrated deep into the south portion of the African continent into what is now Azania, and they are related to the Somali, Maasai, and Nguni people. Mfalme al-Muli, the pre-Kilwa Swahili ruler, would descend from this lineage, and this also refers to Punt in classical documents, which is corroborated by the Stele of Yabu, Nasut Peraha's visit to Queen Hatshepsut, and the extensive trade and commonalities. Swahili is genetically related to Metrem and Kimi and other Paleo-African languages, as can be seen in some of the body part expressions. There's numerous correspondences in architectural tectonics, and EM2 and EM35 subclades from classical Africa and Kimi and Kush that are found in modern Swahili populations firmly establishes these migratory origins and ancestral links. So again, it is very, very clear that from the available archaeological, oral, linguistic, genetic, and historical evidence that we can definitely affirm that the populations of contemporary Western Central Africa have roots in the Hapi River Valley civilizations of Kimi and Kush. It has been confirmed beyond any reasonable doubt that this is a fact, and we should use this information to foster a deeper sense of unity and interrelatedness and collaboration among the populations of the African continent and the diaspora, because this is important when it comes to developing modern African societies that reflect the mission, the values, and the objectives of our ancestors to be the best versions of themselves and their societies that they could possibly be. That's why this is important, and we should completely resist any and all attempts by adversaries, by bad actors, to separate us using these artificial dividing lines, because when we apply the pluridisciplinary approach to the evidence that we have at our disposal, it is clear that we are much more united than we are divided, and we should start to act like it for the better of Africa today and for the future generations.